Good afternoon, everybody. It is Tuesday, the 31st of March in the afternoon here. Kevin Gallman and I are with you here at Mentum Illinois YouTube channel. We've just been thinking a lot about the remote learning recommendations that came from the State Board of Education here in Illinois. They were officially released, well, they were dated last week on Friday. They came out over the weekend. I'm sure that many of you have already dug into those recommendations, but Kevin and I wanted to just offer a little bit of a few things here that jumped out on the screen to us as we were looking through the recommendations document. And again, things that jumped out to us as former teachers, former building administrators. I want to make sure that I put this disclaimer out right here at the outset. We by no means are experts on these recommendations, but what we did want to do was just, again, give you some things that caught our eye. If you look at the screen right there, there's a link on the screen to the full report. If you have not already, please make sure that you take a look at that full report. Again, Jason Eggert. I am a partnership manager here for Edmentum in the state of Illinois. He's Kevin Gallman, holds the same position as I do. He's got the counties of Cook, DuPage, and Will counties, and I cover all of the rest of the counties here in the state of Illinois. Our email addresses are up there for you as well. But again, just to remind you, Kevin and I are taking a look at this through the educator lens, right? Through the lens of a former teacher, former building administrator. Kevin was a former assistant principal. I was a former elementary school principal. He worked at secondary. I've got a little bit of school counseling experience too. So this is the lens that we're using as we talk with you here this afternoon. Some of the themes of the report that we noticed were the ideas of access, making sure that students of all backgrounds, abilities, ethnicities are able to access remote learning during this COVID-19 shutdown. Another one that jumped out to us was the idea of responsibility and how those responsibilities are assigned. And one of the biggest ones is really the idea of communication. I'm going to talk with you a little bit about access first. There's very specific guidance that's in there, two very separate sections that talk about students who are entitled to special education services, students who are entitled to accommodations under Section 504, and also multilingual students, multilinguistic students, English language learners. One of the biggest things that I noticed was, of course, making sure that you're using the U.S. Department of Education guidance. There's a link that's in the document that will take you to that guidance as far as what you're supposed to follow according to state and federal guidelines. And again, districts still have local control in guiding staff and how to comply and meet students' IEP needs. They encourage you to use technology that's available to help students and families when appropriate, again, based on those needs that have been identified in IEPs, 504 plans. Definitely encourages collaboration between general education teachers and special education teachers to make sure that the content is accessible to your students in any of these categories. Of course, making sure that you're mindful of the social and emotional needs of the students, and particularly the stress that might be caused based on this pandemic. And really to take those things into consideration as you're pushing out learning activities, learning tasks to your students. Again, going back to one of those major themes, communicating regularly with students and families in a way that is acceptable, meaning in a way that's expected, in a way that students and families know to find communication, whether it's through email, posts on learning management systems, website posts, and so on. Also making sure that all members of the school's team are involved in the communication, and that would include any of your support staff, your school counselors, social workers, psychologists, and it also talks about paraprofessionals, making sure that paraprofessionals are still on hand to be able to support students remotely, right, virtually. Being clear and specific with students regarding tasks, giving mini deadlines, giving students opportunities to demonstrate understanding and receive feedback, using technology features to make content more accessible, using video to demonstrate tasks for students, incorporating non-digital work as well. So again, balancing between the idea of e-learning and more traditional paper pencil activities. It does talk about specific to grading and assessments that the IEP, this is important, that the IEP team must meet if you plan to change any of the required assessments or the grading according to the IEP. And again, grading should not be punitive. It should support motivation and participation. So again, using the idea of complete versus incomplete as opposed to letter grades or failing grades. So those are all things specific to students on the special education, the IEP 504 plan side of things. Now talking about your multilingual students or your English language learners, giving them lots of opportunities to engage in activities in English and in their native language, communicating with families in both English and in their native language. Using, there's a lot that's in there about using thematically designed activities. There's a lot of guidance in there about using UDL or Universal Design for Learning, using that as your framework. But again, using a combination of both technology and traditional paper pencil activities. If you look at the document in pages 22 and 23, there's ways to highlight skills and knowledge that exist in the homes of multilingual families. And also in pages 23 and 24 in the full report, it gives you some recommendations on integrating learning in authentic ways and finding natural ways to develop language, which I thought was particularly interesting. Talks about using support from paraprofessionals again and tutors when available, using games, play, science investigations, vocabulary sorting, and such. Gives a lot of examples on different types of activities that you can do. It talks about keeping existing guidelines in mind, looking at page 26 in the document, regarding the type of ELL program that you offer, who is to be teaching, how to use differentiation strategies, and so on. So page 26 is definitely important, gives very specific guidelines. Again, thinking about what type of program you are offering. Are you offering transitional bilingual? Are you offering dual language? And so on. One key component, it says, to avoid what it calls a deluge of worksheets for students to practice sub-skills in a rote way. It does not want the activities to be tedious or demotivating for kids. And pages 27 through 29, again, give some very specific guidelines as far as grading for students who are English language learners.
So a couple of the other themes as we talked about responsibilities, and if you go to page 18 of the report, really highlights the different roles in this entire process and the responsibilities for each. So when we look at leadership, we look at the outside things. We look at meals that are still being prepared. We look at, Jason touched on the communication piece, and as we know in working in schools, we do much more than educate using academic materials. We're there for every aspect of a student's journey. So leadership in ensuring that these things are taking place. From a teacher's end, we're going to look through elementary, middle, and high school levels and understand that as the learner age goes up, teacher responsibilities change a little bit, and we're going to see how those are similar and different. And likewise, on the student end, those responsibilities, as they grow older, there's more of a give and take in the distance learning environment, so that students are more responsible for their learning process. And our parents and guardians are always a part of this time, and again, ensuring that students are responding in the appropriate way and continuing to have access to content. All of that, again, is on page 18 of the report. And Jason touched on it again when we look at our IEP communication, 504s, all of the our EL support and communication. That goes for all students as well. So this is not an area that is relegated to those that have that designation. The expectations on distance learning, remote learning for communication are very high. And that's the way we do things now. So without having that face-to-face interaction, communication is the way that schools, leaders, students are continuing the educational experience through this time that can be difficult. So as we look at those, we look at, again, the differentiation between elementary, middle, and high school. And one of the most valuable resources I found in the report is on page 17, especially from a leadership standpoint at the district level, or just to give a quick recommendation to parents. I think this is a really nice framework to look at our minimum and maximum time guidelines. And then the big one, the recommended length for sustained attention, meaning that these are activities that students are working on where that attention span needs to be very, very heightened throughout the day. So as you can see there, pre-K 20 to 60 minutes, K we get 30 to 90, we increase 1 to 2, 45 to 90, 3 to 5, 60 to 120. And then as we move into the secondary level, think about students have multiple classes per day, depending on whether it's a block schedule or a traditional 7-period day schedule. And keeping in mind that students have work for all of those classes. And it's something that we highlight in the report, is that teachers keep that in mind in their recommendations and the assignments that they're providing. So really, really handy guide here. Gives you a brief snapshot to share with parents, with teachers, and students as well.
Talking a little bit about elementary students, the pages in the report that talk specifically about ages birth, right, all the way through grade 5, are on pages 35 through 44 in the report. Big one again, big theme: communicate regularly and when appropriate in multiple languages, so that families know what it is that is expected of their children in this remote learning environment. Make sure that you're focusing on activities, ways that students can demonstrate learning, ways that they can show their learning, not focusing necessarily on simply the completion of assignments or due dates. Those are overarching recommendations for students who are in any of these grade ranges. Now, specific for the very youngest, all the way through 2nd grade, providing a lot of recommendations to families as to what they can do, setting up a daily schedule, playing games, reading books, telling stories. But then it also talks a little bit, which I thought was particularly interesting, on page 40. It does talk a little bit about, once things go back to what would be considered always a normal educational environment, it does talk about the idea of finding a developmentally appropriate assessment, particularly for your toddlers, your preschool kids, your kindergarten age kids, all the way up through 2nd grade. If you don't have a way to determine whether or not they're age appropriate or developmentally appropriate to come back to school, to come back to that assigned grade level that should be where they start according to their age, that you have some sort of an assessment. And actually, it does say in there that ISBE is working on some type of an assessment if you don't already use one. For grades 3 through 5, establishing office hours so that students can connect with their teacher using something like video conference or using something over the phone. Providing digital and traditional activities, so a balance between the two, that are cross-curricular in nature. So taking reading activities and incorporating those, or I should say science, social studies, incorporating those into reading activities and so on. It does talk about project-based learning, things like group video chats, art, music, cooking, and so on. And it does talk about, again, how student grades should not be negatively impacted during this remote learning environment. And again, local districts can decide if things like report cards are to be issued at the end of the year.
So as we move up from our younger learners into the middle school area, you'll find those recommendations, page 45 to 49. And they're not necessarily all separate recommendations. Communication is always, continues to be at the forefront. The grading option of pass incomplete is highlighted as a good option for this time, so that again, what Jason mentioned at the end of the elementary piece is that students should not be negatively impacted during this time. Also really highlighting the skills that are prerequisite skills for the next level. So meaning that probably districts have gone through, they've looked at power standards or non-negotiable standards for each grade level and what is necessary at 6th grade to progress into 7th grade to 8th grade and so on. So really highlighting those non-negotiable, those power standards for each grade level. And again, always making sure that students who do not have access have offline activities that provide instruction, provide feedback in the same way that online instruction would do. So those are the middle school recommendations, building upon the elementary recommendations. And then we move into high school, and we find that on pages 50 through 57. I like this graphic because we think about our high school learners, and we look at that responsibility piece. And again, the same recommendations as far as access, as far as communication, are all there for the high school student. But I think that one of the really great opportunities during this time is to give our students that opportunity to show their responsibility and to show how they are preparing for an environment that at the high school level is going to have distance learning, but also as they progress into college and post-secondary education, more than likely that scenario is going to impact what their next step is. So we're really looking at how students are building their own capacity during this time. So you can see there instructor responsibilities, and just to highlight specific times and methods so that we're really, really clear on what is expected for students. And then multiple pathways for assessment so that we're not just giving that one chapter test or that one unit test and that is it, but we're looking at the whole learning process and ways that we can assess what students have learned. Social emotional needs, always there, and especially as students may or may not be more isolated, really reaching out and finding ways that students can interact and be still engaged either with the teacher or with peers. And then again, moving things to the student level, reaching out with questions and concerns so that we're encouraging students to bring their concerns, their misgivings, anything that's going on right now. We're really providing a strong avenue and ways for feedback there. So that's a brief overview at the high school level. Again, pages 50 to 57, you'll see more content. But I think that is one of the encouraging things about this time, is that we're giving high school students that added responsibility to build into what's next for them.
Thanks, Kevin. Just a quick summary here. We're just wrapping things up. Communication is critical. We cannot stress that enough. That finds its way into this document repeatedly, right, over and over again. In fact, just anecdotally, I was just talking with my wife, and she was saying that she saw locally, there was a parent who has a 5th grader, 2 middle schoolers, and 2 high schoolers. And so an example of communication, they're using the way that's most comfortable, what parents expect. This parent, having 5 children in 2 separate districts, has received 60 emails from teachers today. So that's just an example of the idea of communication and how important that is to make sure that everybody knows what it is that's happening. And again, communicating in both a native language, if that's appropriate, and then also in English. Remember, local control still applies. Make sure that you're collaborating with your team. Kevin and I are seeing so many great things on social media as far as people reaching out, teaming up with one another through social media networks. Make sure that kids' basic needs are met first. Make sure that you're helping families, making sure that kids feel safe, make sure that they're eating, make sure that they have shelter, right? Making sure that they feel sort of everyone wrapping their arms around them. One of the big things, particularly for students who might have any mental health concerns, stressful times like these, any mental health issues that they could be having are going to be exacerbated by the fact that there's all this outside stress going on with the COVID-19 shutdown. Focus on learning and demonstration of learning, not on task completion and due dates. Always making sure that you're referring to federal and state guidelines regarding any special education expectations and also expectations for English language learners. And again, big one, students' grades should not be negatively impacted during this remote learning time. And again, there's that link at the bottom of the screen for the full report.
So thanks for watching. Thanks for taking the time, and as you dig into the 62-page report, hopefully this will be a guideline for you and help you get to those answers a little bit more quickly. Please like and subscribe our Edmonton, Illinois YouTube channel, and follow Jason and I on Twitter. And we will look to keep you updated as we go through this time. And we'll also be sharing other recommendations as we move forward from other educators as well as from our Edmonton team. So thank you so much, and we look forward to helping you during this time.